What's up? We're on the boat today, but we're not on the water. The last trip I took, I discovered that my trim switch went bad. So, trying to test out the trim switch, I ended up following it back to my pump, and one of the solenoids are bad, so I ordered a new one. This one's got leaky lines. It wants to work when it wants to. It's just old, so I decided to freshen it up. So I figured I'd bring y'all along with it, but here's the new ones. Pump, wiring, and the part that I like most is this guy. I'll be able to actually see what I'm doing and not have to guess where the tabs are. It makes a huge difference. But we're gonna get started. This side over here is the side that went bad. It wanted to stick and it would stop working. It's because that solenoid was out. This side works fine, but the switch is bad, so it don't want to work at all. But I figured I'd take y'all along with swapping this guy out. Alright, so here's my old pump. As you can tell, this one's kind of wore out anyhow. The seal on the collar there kind of wore out, and it's starting to leak a little bit of fluid anyway, and that pump sounds bad. Whenever I do use the trim tabs, it kind of winds back and forth, and it was full on fluid and everything, so it's probably getting ready to go out. But I'm going to pull this harness, pull this pump, pull the lines, and then go through and swap out this old switch up here. So get started. Out with the old, in with the new. Alright, so the first thing I'm gonna get started with, I've already disconnected the wires, but I'm gonna start with the switch. Just work backwards. Get it popped up. I don't really care about it anymore because it's bad. So the rockers work fine in it, clicks fine, but I've already looked up underneath the console and seen why it went bad. It's because of salt and somebody not putting no-ox on there, which keeps oxidation from going, or keeps oxidation from happening. And when you don't do that, that's what happens. It starts eating away and corroding the insides of it. So I'm gonna start disconnecting these and then start pulling wires from front to back, and then pull in the new wire as I'm pulling the old wire out. That way I've got a fish tape or a tag line that I can pull it from. So let me get started. Alright, so these are my plugs here. I'm pulling from the console back to the transom. So that being said, you're going to pay attention to your switch housings for the plugs. Male, 2 females. So this here and this here is the wrong size or side. This here is the right side, because this is going to go back towards the transom. Obviously it's not going to plug up here. So we'll switch these around, and then we're going to tape them up. We're going to taper them like this first. That way it kind of glides going through. And then you want to tape from the bottom up to the top. Then go get your tag end of wires from the console or wherever you're pulling from. You want to make sure you're pulling in the right direction. That way your housings end up on the right side. But then take your tag wire and then roll back down. That way when you roll back down, the tape is in a form to where whatever it hits going through, it slides over the tape rather than bunching up against the edges. So I'm gonna grab the other ends of these and get them taped up. So we're gonna take these guys, the opposite end, which is what we're gonna pull to the back. We're gonna take our 2 female housings, and our male housing and tape them up. Like I said, taper them. Start from the bottom or the back side of these. You want to try to create a ramp as best you can, that way it doesn't get bunched up on you and hang up. Try to make it one smooth transition. And I'm going to try to close this end of the plug off, the way nothing gets into the connector there. And then we'll take this side to the front, that way we can get it ready to pull through. These are our old wires that we're pulling from the console. We'll pull them down past there a little bit and tape them up. Like I said, try to create a little bit of a ramp. That way it has a better chance of getting over whatever may be down there, especially with other things you might already have going on, wiring, hosing, what have you. I'm not worried about how pretty the tape looks, just needing it to serve its purpose. But you also want it smooth enough to where if you have to pull it back out, because it won't go through, you don't get jammed up. So that's it. So now you're gonna have to work it into this hole and pull it back there. So go to the other side over here and get this side prepped. Alright, so like I said earlier, I had this side disconnected and ready to go. So this is the old harness. I'm going to start working it through this tiny hole and hopefully get it to pull through. Alright, so we'll put out the old harness, wire harness anyway, and we pulled the new one through. So right now I'm just cutting the tape, going through and making sure I don't hit any of the new wiring. And I'm going to try to save the old wiring just in case, because the wires are still good. I might could use that harness for something in the future. And I started with the wiring harness first, just because that's one of the more pain in the butt processes for me, because I have a lot of wiring and hosing and tubing and whatnot going through the bottom of my boat and into the helm, or the console rather. I'm gonna finish getting this tape off and then I'll show y'all what's next. Alright, got all the tape off. Now I'm just going to check out the housings, make sure nothing got nasty going through the bottom of the boat. You never know what's down there. And check the wiring, make sure that nothing got cut, everything's good. So now I'm going to pull this excess sensor wire through for the back of the trim tabs and then get these prepped up, because one has to go onto the other side of the boat and one stays here. And then this guy gets planted because it's going to get plugged into the pump. So that'll be the next process. Alright, so something else to keep in mind is you're going to have two separate sensors doing two different things. They're doing the same thing but on different motors or solenoids. So you want to take one of your wires, mark it for port side or starboard, doesn't matter as long as you know which one's which. You're going to pull tension and figure out where the other wire is coming from. This way you know this wire is the one that you marked. Now you have a way to designate one side or the other. That way you don't have to go back and figure out which one's which, or you get out on the water and you fail to test everything at the house, and now one side's working the opposite direction and your switches are backwards. So just a little pointer. Alright, so while I'm getting this side ready to pull the wire through, I'm also going to pull the old hydraulic line and pull the new hydraulic line through at the same time. So I'm going to start with disconnecting that guy, and I'm going to go ahead and pull off the old trim tabs and the actuators in the back. So we'll get started on that. Alright, now we got the cylinder off and scraped off all the old sealant. So now I'm going to take some acetone, clean off the hole, get the fluid wiped up, and I'm going to work on taking this tab off. You want to make sure you clean everything off really good, get all the old sealant off, that way it has a smooth surface to adhere to once you're done. Then, whenever you're done, you can check for everything. Make sure you got all the old stuff out when you're done wiping everything off anyway. For me, getting all the old sealant off, I just use a regular straight blade, like so. Then you can kind of carve the rough stuff off, and then you can go back and scrape over it. You don't have to worry about it too much, because if you work inside the area where the head of the cylinder is going to be, where it attaches, it's not really going to be something that you got to worry about scraping or dinging and messing up and scratching and all that good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here and clean out all this old fluid that pulled through whenever I disconnected it. You can just get it to where the sealant will adhere to it. So I'll work on that next. Alright, I've unscrewed the tab, and these just come off. They hook on the bottom and they get screwed into the plate. So now I'm going to work this plate off and then clean everything up behind it. This seems like a better alternative. Alright, that plate's off. Now I'm going to scrape everything off. This will be fun. There is a lot of sealant up underneath here. Alright, so that took a little while. That old plate was on there pretty good. Ended up bending that thing trying to get it off, but we got the inside of it cleaned out. It's scraped off all smooth. This side, the bottom of it looks rough, but those little scratches and stuff ain't gonna bother me because it's gonna be hidden by the new plate that goes on, and it'll actually probably help with the sealant and give it something to grab to. I'm gonna peel these out a little bit, get that old sealant out, and try to touch it up with some epoxy. And then I'm going to put some marine sealant in there, put the new plate on, and then I've got a new diagram I have to fit over this. That way I can drill a new hole, because these new tabs have that sensor in them. It's not just the through nipple that goes through, it's also this wire. So this wire has to go through, that way it knows whether it's up or down inside the head. So that's next. Alright, I just finished the starboard side, and now I'm about to take off the actuator. But first I gotta take off the pump, release the fluid lines, and then go from there. Then I can clean the rest of that out. Then I can start assembling things and putting things in and getting it to where I want it, and pre-running all these hydraulic lines and the sensor wires. So it's coming along nice. I think it's gonna be a pretty nice system. I'm probably gonna be really happy with it. Be a lot easier with it being digitally done too. So anyways, I'll get back to it. Alright, this is what I was talking about earlier. My pump motor. This is the solenoid that went bad. Lost contact and don't work anymore. And you're able to test them through these pins here. If you take the hot side of your battery while the ground's connected, you can just take the hot side and test the pins, see if it turns out in starboard port side. So port side on mine's the one that went bad, but I'm gonna get in here and clean all this up, get these lines out, get them ready to pull, go to the next step. Alright, so I've got the holes drilled, got the diagram cut out for this to be fed through, so now I'm just feeding through the sensor wire. Got the other side cleaned up. And these cylinders, it doesn't matter, they're for either port side or starboard, but we're on the port side now, so I'm gonna get this fed through and get the other one done. Alright, so now this is fitted in, pulled through. We got some 5200 sealant. Just going to put it around these beads, or put a bead around these holes here where we're going to put it in and seal everything up. Then everything's already pretty much pre-drilled because of the last set that was on here, but this 5200 is some nasty stuff, so keeping acetone on hand helps a lot. One thing you do want to avoid though is getting any sealant inside this hole here, because this is where your hydraulic fluid or your automatic transmission fluid, anyway, that's where it's going to go through, and you got to put a through hole nipple that connects to this, and then if that's covered up, you don't want them threads getting nasty with 30 or 5200. It makes a big mess. So I've got a little bit that's really close to the hole. I'm going to work on getting that cleaned off and then go from there. Just want to get them lined up first before you start cinching them down. Go around and try to put even pressure. Try to watch the way the sealant comes off the edges of it and cinches down with it. We've got the starboard side ready to go. You're gonna have a plate. You're gonna have a locking plate. I don't know what they call it, but it's called a locking plate. And you're gonna have your tab. First thing you're gonna do is put sealant on the back side of the first plate. You're gonna line it up either to the holes that are already there and hope that they match, which these do in my case, or you'll hold it up, mark the holes after you've got it planed out to where it needs to be on your boat. I'm not going to go through all that because I'm running out of time, but anyways, when you get ready, get your plate on. It should stick with the sealant itself, and then you're going to have your screws, 6 of them. That's going to go through, and then you're going to take your trim tab, this locking piece, it's going to go on here, which it can slide on after, but you're going to mount them and screw them on together, and this is how they're going to go: bracket, locking piece, trim tab, and then it's going to go through this little hook right here. So we're going to do that real quick. Getting dark on me, so I'm gonna hurry up and show you what's going on. It's finished on that side. On the starboard side, it's all sealed up, looks good. So I'm gonna wait till the next day and we'll do the other side over here. Be back with you. Morning guys, I'm back on the trim tabs, and right now I'm getting the through hole nipples ready to go through the transom. believe it's supposed to be done before putting the cylinders on, or at least certain ones, but I didn't like doing that because I don't like cramming a bunch of stuff through this pipe. I want to make sure that everything's good and clean. But all I'm doing is coating the threads with some Teflon. I'm gonna go ahead and put these elbows on, and then I'm gonna spin them into place and get them inside the cylinders. So you want to be sure not to over tighten this stuff, the way it doesn't strip out, for one, and two, well, you have plenty of room to work with. You just want them finger tight, and then you want to take vice grips or whatever to hold your piping, and then spin it another turn, maybe two. Yeah. And then make sure that everything's tight. So I bet people think I'm goofy talking to a camera, but that's alright. Alright, so these guys are ready to go. Another thing to keep in mind is, first, you don't want to put too much Teflon on this to where you're trying to wedge and crush it in there. You got so much in there that you can't get it as tight as you need to. Second is, whenever you know you're going to put in threads and they're not reverse threads, you want to start and rotate it the way that you would turn it into the female side of it. So you know you're going to tighten it this way, so you want the Teflon to go with it. You don't want it to go the opposite direction to where it bunches up, because if it bunches up, it's going to come off and it's not going to be any good. But for me, I'm going to I used it a little too less. You don't want to use too much. I use too less. Anyways, start it kind of like this here, to where, like I said, when you tighten it into it, it rolls into the threads and doesn't get bunched up. Now, I got a lot of excess on here. You don't want that. I'm just going to cut it off, just round around the edges. You don't want anything blocking the hydraulic fluid coming through. Simple, clean. Alright, let's go. Alright. Now for the other side. It's probably going to be harder for y'all to see because it's got batteries and everything inside this side. This one's definitely going to be a bit more tricky. I'm gonna go ahead and get this one in real quick. I'll show you after. Goes in. Alright, so this guy here is in. The other one's in. So we're going to now get the tubing and everything prepped. And I guess I can show y'all what it looked like, or it looks like now. Everything's dried up. Everything came out nice and clean. I'm happy with it. And I went ahead and did this side too because it was getting dark and I didn't want that 5200 I had to get dried up before I use it again. Everything went in smooth, clean. I like it. So we'll go ahead and get the tubing prepped up and get these wires and stuff ready to go through. So, alright, so this is the cap. The screws that cap on. I'll put it back in here so I don't lose it. This is your ground wire. This is your sensor, and here we have the new pump. You're gonna have this label on here. It's gonna fill it or cover the fill tube. This is the bracket. This bracket has an inset like this. The way when it's flat up against the mounting surface, those wings right there on the back of that pump, they slide into this. So I'm gonna put them into the back, or put this new bracket in the back where this one is, and pull that off, and then show you all that. Alright, so the bracket's in. I already had holes to go to use as a guide, but you can use it as a guide itself. Mark your holes and make sure you use the short screws that come with your kit. You don't want to pre-drill and then go through your transom and go through the back side. You want to make sure that you got the right sized screws and bit. But anyways, that's in. So now I'm going to work on getting this tubing to that brass fitting down there and go ahead and get it set. That way when I put the pump up there, I don't have to fight it. Alright, so starboard side's done. Remember, starboard is your green, port side is your red. This is starboard side. Sealed up these holes, slid the bracket in. I missed it the first time, I wasn't paying attention, but your wires go into the back before you slide it in. As you'll see here on this new pump, or this old pump, there's a groove back here, and that's where they'll go. They'll fall into that. But I'm gonna get this side ready to pull the wire and the tubing, pull it over to here, go ahead and get this guy hooked up too. Then we can start plugging everything in, testing it after we put the fluid in it. Alright, like I was saying earlier, needed to finish this side up and get it tightened up. The other side was hard to see, so I can show you on this one. But you insert your tube, get your nut on, it's going to be kind of awkward because the tubing itself being pushed kind of pushes that nut around a little bit, but you want to keep your tubing as straight as you can without creasing it. Get it up in there snug, get your nut tight as tight as you can with your fingers. Then use a wrench, finish it off. You don't want to go super tight on these guys either. Make sure everything is snug. Then we can start bleeding the system out. This here, this housing, if you notice, you have your red and your black wire. This is the sensor wire that comes from the cylinders. You want to match up your housing that comes with it because you have to clip this together. You want to make sure that you put it in the correct way, orient it the right way, so that when you put the pins in, everything plugs up so these slide over. So this is going to go this way. Your red wire is going to go on the right, your black wire is going to go on the left. So keep this pin, this housing, oriented the right way for these pins. So we're going to go ahead and slide the black pin into the left. And pull this rubber gasket up and over. These pins click into this housing. You'll notice when they go in, you'll hear it click, and you want to make sure you hear it click so they don't come out. You want to make sure both sides does it. So that's the black. And there's the red. Right there. Then you want to slide this gasket back in here. Make sure everything's good and good to go. And this here goes over the edge, or goes over the edge of it. You want to also make sure that this slides appropriately to the orange one that's in here, because it helps guide these pins into each other. Just like that. So now they will clip together, and that's it. So I'm gonna do this other side and get this other side prepped and ready to go. Alright, so here's the next part. If you remember back when we talked about it earlier, we labeled one of these wires to designate whether it's port side or starboard. It comes with these stickers. You can use these. I didn't notice them before, but at least I was able to catch it from before. But I'm gonna go ahead and label them anyway, even though there's hydraulic fluid on it and it's not gonna be as sticky. So this is my female clip from port side. This will be my female clip from starboard. The first one that we did a while ago was from port side, but we're going to make sure that we double check the way nothing gets crossed. Alright, so this is the male from port side. This is the male side from starboard, which is your right side of your boat if you're driving it. Port side's going to be on your left, which should have been learned if you're properly driving your boat and you have a boating license. But anyway, you go ahead and plug these guys in and then get all these wires pulled to where everything's taut and neatly clipped away. So you'll have starboard, clip, port side, clip. Alright, now I'm gonna clean these up. So before I clean these up, this is the plug from the switch, or from the pump that we have to hook up to the switch. This is the harness to that switch. I'm going to plug this guy up in here. Alright. As you'll notice, the lines are ran. Everything's taut. This is port side. This is starboard. Remember, port side is red, starboard is green. Make sure your lines aren't in anywhere where they can get bumped and messed up to where these crease up and rip or pull out. And I'm gonna get all these cleaned up. Alright, she's in there, wires are cleaned up, ground's connected, everything else is done up at the front other than filling it up here, putting the cover on and tightening that screw down. So I'm gonna get started on the switch up here. Alright, here's the old hole for the screw, or the, not screw. Here's the old hole for the switch. I'm probably gonna have to ream it out because the other switch is much bigger, so. Alright, so this hole is obviously much bigger, or gonna have to be much bigger, so I'm gonna get it set up and lined out to where all I gotta do is cut it out. So here we go. It's gonna look nice though when it's done. Well, switch is in, looks nice, came out nice. I don't know if you were able to tell in the warp, but it's hard to drill over a hole that's already been drilled. So if you had corners like I did, you can take and use it to your advantage and go in reverse to start the hole, especially in fiberglass. And you can kind of round out where you need to go first if you go slow, but at a certain steady speed so it don't chop you up and bounce you all over the place. You can then get your circle or your hole lined out to where you can then go in forward. That saves it from chipping the fiberglass and from bouncing all over the place. Other than that, you can slide a smaller hole saw bit underneath the other hole saw bit that you had if you have no pilot hole to guide you, and you still run it in reverse and then forward. Otherwise you can use masking tape and go over your hole, and that kind of helps save your fiberglass from chipping. But anyway, here's the rest of the wiring. We're going to get these all sorted out, get what we can plugged in, and then focus on where the rest of these wires go. Alright, so here's the remaining wires. Your black's obviously going to be the ground. The purple's going to go to ignition, and your orange wires are for power. We already have an orange wire here. It gives us power. That was from the old system, and I believe it's hooked up to the ignition, but we're going to check that. Going to make sure that whenever we turn this key on, that it gets power. We're going to check this in DC. We've got a purple wire here coming from our ignition, so we're going to splice into this because I don't have any other open spots, and then we're going to tag our purple wire into the ignition so that way it comes on when the boat key's turned on. Alright, ended up tagging into a toggle switch of mine instead of the ignition because my ignition is short, for one. And two, my ignition sometimes likes to fall backwards and the gauges go off. Until I get that fixed, I just like the toggle idea better. It sends power to the ignition side of the switch, therefore that's when it turns on. But I just added fluid, so now we got to calibrate everything. And this thing eats a lot of fluid too. So now we're going to go all the way down, 15 seconds, and then make sure that both tabs go all the way down. And this system is a self-bleeding system, so it'll purge its air out by itself. You don't have to worry about doing all that. Alright, now that I got everything calibrated, now I'm going to bleed the system out, so I'm just going to run these up and down until the gurgling stops. Alright, that's it. So now I gotta clean everything up and put everything together, clean some of these wires up, put my basil back in, and call it good. So I'm gonna get this cleaned up, then I'll go make this video, and that's it. I forgot to tell you, whenever you fill up your trim reservoir, you'll use any type of automatic transmission fluid. It don't matter. It says it doesn't matter. If you have trim and tilt fluid, you can use that too. I wouldn't recommend power steer fluid or anything like that. It doesn't have the same detergents and all that in it, and it may harm the seals. I don't know. And the only other thing I could say is maybe if you have the extra hose, I did notice that with a short hose, obviously this one runs way faster on the starboard side and this one takes a little bit longer. You could take and extend that hose out a little bit to where they kind of work at the same speed, but that's only if it's all up, all down at the same time. So that's just up to you guys. It don't bother me because I'll be using it in small increments. So, but anyways, thank y'all for watching. Again, this is Habitual Angler, and may not have been a fishing trip, but this has to do with mini fishing trips. So if you guys like this type of stuff too, then let me know. I'll keep doing these things, because the next thing I got to do to this boat is, for one, clean it, 2, plugs, and 3, foot oil. So I can bring y'all along with that, and maybe we can check out fuses and stuff like that, see what you need to be looking out for whenever you're taking your boats out. So thank y'all again for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.